You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. More than 30 years ago, in 1986, my younger sister, Cathy Thomas, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, was murdered together with her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, a senior at William & Mary. 10 years ago, after the FBI lost control of 78 highly graphic crime scene photos, I became much more involved in what many people refer to as the Colonial Parkway murders. I've now become the de facto leader, 8 families who lost loved ones in the Colonial Parkway murders. 4 couples murdered, approximately 1 couple a year over a 3-year period. I'm now working on a book on the Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator, together with Kristin Dilley, of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, a victim's advocate, and I have a lifelong interest in true crime.
Hello and welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley. And I'm joining Bill today by phone because technology has once again taken a pot shot at us. We are having major trouble with Google Hangouts, which is our preferred method of podcasting. Forgive any issues with the sound quality. It is just me with my phone and my earbuds joining Bill and his massive network of equipment.
And don't forget, we tried Skype too, so we've got bad things to say about all technology and the evil gremlins that run said technology.
Yeah, nothing but bad words right at the moment.
Right, which we're not going to use here on the podcast.
Not at all, but we are here and we are so happy to talk to everybody today. Bill, I hear we have some great news in terms of downloads.
We do. I have the pleasure of announcing that we have just crossed over 10,000 downloads of our new podcast. We're very
unbelievable,
pleased and proud. So
we are
all of you
thrilled
for all of your support, and please tell your friends.
Yeah, please do. And the other thing that we want to mention is that reviews and ratings are so important for a brand new podcast. If you are liking what you're hearing, and we hope that you are, please take the time to write a review for us on your preferred podcast platform, whatever that may be. Our social media manager, Ziggy Starda, will enjoy looking at them. And many of you have complimented Ziggy for being such an amazingly handsome young man, and he thanks you very much for the compliment.
Even though he hates...
He's just shy.
Okay.
He doesn't hate you. I promise. Just shy.
I'm pleased that Oliver Wendell Weiner, our tech support and spokesdog, has made his appearance on social media.
In his gorgeous blue raincoat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
He is such a sweet-looking buddy. I have yet to meet him. He talks quite often. Whenever we're on the phone, I can usually hear Oliver barking in the background.
Sooner or later, he'll show up on the podcast, so there's no question about that, because it seems that every time Kristin and I talk, there's Oliver charging through the room to challenge the UPS man or somebody.
Could it be because your dog hates me?
No. He is going to love you when he meets you in person. He just, well, it's funny. Actually, he charged into the office/library just a couple of hours ago because he heard you and me on the phone and thought there was someone here that needed to be challenged. In person, he is just going to be an absolute love sponge.
Well, he is certainly the protector of your beautiful house and home. So he's a very, very good boy, no matter what it is that he's doing.
On a more serious note, a case that we've been following with great interest is a case that combines both Michigan and Virginia in a very interesting way. A man named Dennis Bowman has just been extradited from his home in Michigan to Virginia. He's going to be charged in the 1980 murder of Kathleen Doyle, who was a Navy wife who was killed while her husband was away. She was raped and murdered at their home. The case had been cold this past November. Forensic genealogy was able to move that case forward. Bowman was identified as a suspect. Both Michigan and Virginia authorities have been working together with the NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, to bring Dennis Bowman to justice, and he is being returned to Norfolk, Virginia to face charges as we speak.
And it is such a sad case, but I am so pleased, as I know you are as well, that forensic genealogy is continuing to do wonders in bringing down the number of cold cases in this country. Well, we hope that you all enjoy part 2 of our podcast on the case of Nicole Madison Lovell. Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
Thank you for listening.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. My name is Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley. And today we'll be talking about the 2018 trials of David Eisenhower and Natalie Keepers for the 2016 murder of 13-year-old Nicole Lovell.
So we're back for part 2 of our discussion of the murder of Nicole Madison Lovell. This kind of takes us to the trial phase, does it not?
Very interesting information to cover here, so let's go ahead and jump right in. David Eisenhower went to trial on February 5th, 2018, and he was charged with first-degree murder, abduction, and concealing a dead body.
And this is almost exactly 2 years after the investigation into the murder of Nicole Lovell.
Just about that. That sounds about right. The prosecutor went ahead and laid out the case that Eisenhower had laid out his plan for Nicole's abduction and murder, along with Natalie Keepers. The prosecutor, Mary Pettit, asserted that they purchased a shovel together, which we know to be true because we have video footage from Walmart, do we not?
And apparently Walmart is the number one choice for picking up supplies pre- and post-murder.
They did show up a second time at Walmart a little bit later, picking up cleaning supplies, and bleach wipes, and so on and so forth.
Gloves for two, I noticed.
Yes. So they really took the time and figured out ahead of time where should we go to pick up everything that we need to dispose of this 13-year-old that we're planning on murdering.
I know. Let's pick up all of our supplies at a place we know for sure has a security camera system. It's possible the local hardware store, and we do believe in shopping local, by the way, it's possible the local hardware store might not have had a security camera. You can bet your bippy, as they used to say. Walmart definitely has security cameras.
Boy, you are showing your age there, Mr. Elder Statesman. Gee whiz.
I'm feeling creaky even as I say that.
Wow. Yeah.
My mom and dad would be proud of me, though.
So they did buy their supplies together, and they selected an isolated area of Craig Creek Road together.
Now, what's the story? Craig Creek Road has come up a lot in our research.
It has, and if that name does sound familiar to you, that is because Craig Creek Road runs adjacent to the Caldwell Fields area, which is where Heidi Childs and David Metzler were murdered in 2009. Hopefully, for those of you who listened and did your homework, you remember that.
And
says the teacher.
Okay, now you're outing yourself as as that teacher.
Yep.
And sadly, that's a case that's still unsolved.
Also of note, our guest, Lisa Lucas Gardner, did mention that at the end of Craig Creek Road, adjacent to the Caldwell Fields, is a public shooting range, which was frequented by Virginia Tech shooter.
From 2007.
And by Ross Truett Ashley from 2011, who shot the Virginia Tech police officer, Derek Krause. Some interesting parallels here continuing.
That's at least 4 cases with a direct tie-in to this particular road.
Yeah, and again, we are not saying that there is any correlation cases other than the fact that these locations are in rural areas of Blacksburg. Our guest, Lisa Lucas Gardner, did say that she had wondered if Natalie and David were cognizant in some way or another of what had happened at the Caldwell Fields when they chose Craig Creek Road to take Nicole and ultimately murder her. I don't think we're ever going to have a definitive answer to that. It is certainly an interesting question if they knew whether or not, there had been a previous unsolved double murder committed adjacent to the area where they took Nicole.
It's also interesting to note that this firing range is completely unsupervised, which is unique in my experience. I've only been to a firing range a few times to, fire guns in a safe environment, target shooting and that kind of thing. The ones I've been to over the years almost always have a supervisor or an instructor, usually a guy with a significant amount of experience with different types of weaponry. And he's there to log you in, provide paper targets, a certain degree of coaching, if you will, on your marksmanship. The idea of a completely unsupervised shooting range was new to me. The ones I've been to have always had someone there monitoring what was going on. There's obviously that individual is typically very safety focused, so could be he or she. In my experience, it's usually a experienced older man who's a marksman. But they're very focused on safety, reminding you to always be facing your weapons downfield, and when you step away, they're very strict about things like, making certain that your weapon's always pointed down. The assumption is always that a weapon's loaded, even if you think that it's not, or that there's a round in the chamber, even if you think that you've emptied, because, things do happen. I remember as far back as being a Boy Scout, these guys were pretty strict because they really wanted to make certain that everybody was safe. You had fun, you had a good time, you got a chance to fire your gun in a safe environment, that they were really focused on keeping everyone at the shooting range, whether you were there as an observer or a shooter, safe. So the idea that there would be completely unsupervised shooting range is unique in my experience.
Well, we don't know how much David or Natalie was aware of the previous crimes that had happened at Virginia Tech. It is interesting and notable that David did live in West Ambler Hall, which is where 2 of the murders of Virginia Tech students had taken place in 2007. Just an interesting series of coincidences that kind of continues to resonate throughout this case. And at any rate, getting back to David and the prosecution's discussion of the evidence against him, they made note of the fact that among the many items that were listed on David Eisenhower's web browser were searches for the following terms: knockout drugs, how long does it take to burn a body, and how does the TV serial killer Dexter get rid of bodies?
In addition to his messages to his friend asking similar questions about how to dispose of a body, where do you hide a body?
Precisely. So they're certainly laying the groundwork that this was a premeditated crime and that this had been in the works for quite some time. According to the timeline laid out by prosecutor Mary Pettit, on the evening in question, David Eisenhower left his dorm with Natalie Keepers to purchase the shovel at the Walmart in Christiansburg. He later told police it was for snow shoveling purposes. I think we have a pretty good indicator of what that was actually for.
Something that a guy that lives in a dorm wouldn't usually be focused on.
Yeah.
Because last time I lived in a dorm, no removal was included.
Precisely. After picking up that shovel at the Walmart in Christiansburg, they drove to the cookout in Blacksburg to go eat. According to prosecutors, they drove around looking for a place to kill Nicole Lovell and eventually settled on Craig Creek Road.
And from my perspective, and we'll be talking about Natalie Keepers in a minute, but I think she is into this thing all the way up to the top of her curly head. She is so essential, and some people even say a driver, in this very sad and tragic decision to kill this little girl. I find it fascinating that the 2 of them, whose interests began to diverge as they headed into the trial phase, had managed to convince themselves that this was a good idea.
You really do have to wonder, at what point did these 2 start to derail? At what point do you go from, well, David, you should just break up with her, to, well, David, I don't know, I think you're going to have to kill her? Where does that happen along the way? That is truly baffling to me.
Agreed. And by all accounts, David Eisenhower was an accomplished student, very, very smart guy. He was legitimately a track star in high school.
Very gifted athlete.
Some of his high school classmates complained that he was socially awkward, that he didn't pay attention to social cues. Now, on some level, he's brilliant, and then he's a terrific athlete, and was often described as arrogant or even cocky. One of his fellow students saying, I'm David Eisenhower, you saw me on the local news, because he had won a track meet. And at the same time, people remember him as being the kid in class that always wanted to have the right answer and always wanted to be first, and ignored social cues from his friends in high school. He had attended a Christian school where he was really an outstanding student on many levels, but then he had this awkward quality. They talked about him not doing well in unstructured situations. It's funny, you think about track, and my sister Cathy ran track. There's a structure there. I think that expression, the loneliness of the long-distance runner, that is the kind of thing you can really, really focus on. It's very finite. You're running from place to place, and it can be a bit of a solitary pursuit. I think that probably fit some of his mental acuity, the things he wanted to focus on. And yet, when things got unstructured, his high school friends said he didn't know what to do. He was awkward and a bit lost.
Again, as a teacher, I see plenty of students like that every single day, but I just cannot think of what would make someone take a leap from that to murder. How does that ever seem to be a logical choice for someone?
It seems like a gigantic leap, and this one obviously has tragic consequences.
And it clearly wasn't just one person who made that leap. It was a second one. I would have hoped that at some point in all of this, one of the two of them might have stopped and said, maybe we shouldn't do this. This doesn't seem quite right. Maybe this is, maybe we need to stop and think about this plan again. But apparently, no, it was full speed ahead.
As we talked about in our previous episode, I think there were multiple stops along the way where any kind of reasonable thought should have led either one or both of them to say, maybe this isn't a good idea. From the very first time Nicole climbed out the window to meet him, and he looked at her and said, and he admitted this in court, he thought she was 11 years old, and she was very, very young looking. This isn't a 13-year-old girl that could have passed for 16. She looks like a little kid because 11. She still was on a lot of levels. From there forward, even to the point where, okay, we need to break up with her, move beyond our really inappropriate relationship. He didn't need to sleep with her. He didn't need to meet her a second time. There were so many places he could have tapped the brake, but I still can't help but think, without implying that David's blameless in any of this, far from it. There's Natalie Keepers in the background, pushing for whatever reason.
So continuing on with the blueprint for the evening, the night of January 27th, David Eisenhower picked up Nicole Lovell from her home, climbed out of the window to meet him, wrapped in that blue Minions blanket. Her fingerprints and her blood was found in the trunk of his car, so we know that she was in his car at some point. He stabbed her 14 times in the throat and chest at the Craig Creek Road location and left her body there. However, the news had gotten out that this 13-year-old girl was missing, and David Eisenhower began to panic, and deciding that he did not want her body to be found in that immediate area, he contacted Natalie Keepers, and they went to the dump site, picked up her body, and decided that ultimately they would dispose of it across the border in North Carolina.
And 17 hours elapsed between the time of the murder and leaving the body there. By the way, no attempt to hide the body, bury the body, or anything like that.
Not that I've come across, no. Not that I have seen.
So they return to the scene of the crime, as it were, collect the body, and load Nicole Lovell's body into his car.
According to the prosecutor, they stopped for supplies at Walmart while Nicole's body was still in the trunk of the car, and then headed on their way. And as they were leaving, they were tossing her belongings in various places. Natalie testified to dumping Nicole's backpack into the New River. There were a number of different places where they threw the knife, threw the cell phone case. Some of Nicole's belongings did, however, end up in Natalie Keepers' possession. When her dorm room was searched at Lee Hall, there was a gym bag containing clothes, underwear, and that blue Minions blanket with Nicole's blood on it was found in Natalie's dorm room.
Yeah, this whole thing seems so bizarrely haphazard. They supposedly had talked about killing her for weeks, and yet these two seem to have thrown away things at random. And then why in the world would you keep things that would incriminate you in a young girl's death?
It is very much a mixed presentation. They seem very organized in some aspects, but disorganized in others. I kind of get the feeling that maybe they didn't have a contingency plan for what they would do. Why else would you go pick up a body 17 hours later and decide that you were going to dump it across the North Carolina line?
And in one of David's messages to his friend who lived across the country, he said something about, plan A didn't work. So the implication was they were on to plan B. The friend didn't completely understand the implications of the references that David was making, but that became clear later that it appeared that the initial dumping of the body and then the decision to move it, that was moving into plan B, which still sounds like a disaster.
It's like you were saying before, these guys were absolutely terrible about alleviating all their digital footprints. They clearly did not think all that much about it. And it's certainly not like they're any better at wiping out their physical tracks of the crime either. There were a number of messages between the two after the murder that were brought into evidence for the trial. And it wasn't like these two were trying to avoid each other in the days after committing this murder. They continued exchanging series of text messages and messages on the Kik app, probably because those were anonymous. Among those messages, according to the sources that I was taking a look at, was a discussion of the fact that they both smelled like cleaning fluid from disposing of Nicole's body. They also discussed statistics on the number of missing children who are never found. Presumably, I guess, they wanted people to assume that Nicole had run away. And Eisenhower's assertion to follow that the police don't really investigate runaways anyway.
Although even from the get-go, Nicole's parents expressed a great deal of doubt, and they seemed to get support from law enforcement in the community that Nicole had not run away. She wouldn't have run away without her life-saving medication.
Without her medication, yeah,
so
absolutely.
None of this makes any sense. And it's funny, in the previous episode, I had described these two people, David Eisenhower and Keepers, as smart young people, and they were and are. At the same time, when the trials move forward, you start to doubt just how smart these two people were. They were unbelievably stupid about this attempt to hide their crime.
They're just not street savvy or street smart or whatever you want to call it. And I really don't like the term street smart. But you can be very, very academically intelligent, but still have no concept of how to function in the real world and solve real world problems. And I'm not saying that a real world problem everyone needs to understand is how to get rid of a dead body. I'm not saying that at all. But boy, these two certainly did not really think it through.
But searching for it on the internet, I mean...
Oh my gosh, right? I know.
It's so... One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com. Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. Unbelievably stupid.
It really, really is. You just have to, again, you have to wonder, where were their heads in all of this? How would you explain that away?
It's funny, true confessions here too. While the two of us were doing our research, we're both reading articles and watching news clips and so on. And one of us confessed, I really don't like these people. And I think that was Kristin. And I confessed back, the more I read about them, the less I like them.
Oh, yeah. It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind how at 18 and 20, you can just plan this heinous crime against an innocent 13-year-old girl. Who does that?
Minimum 3 lives were directly destroyed. And then the families, their families, by the way, they're victims too on some level. And then Nicole's parents. I've likened these cases to dropping a stone in a pond, and there are just ripples that go out from that center point where the rock enters the water. The closer you are, the bigger the waves are. They're small in the ultimate scheme of things. That ripple effect that just goes out from a series of just terrible, thoughtless decisions. The crime has been committed, and then the rock has been dropped, and the waves just go out from that center point. This is just one of those things that it just makes no sense whatsoever.
There are some people who refer to the family members of homicide victims as secondary victims. And I think that's, and certainly, Bill, you can speak to this more than I can. I would say that that's right on the money.
I find myself sitting here nodding my head. I would agree. One of the things that came out at Natalie's trial as it proceeded was her mental state. What did they have to say about Natalie Keepers?
Boy, oh boy. Well, there had been, as I imagine there would be in most trials, neuropsychologists who were called in to take a look at, certainly at Natalie. I did not find anywhere that a psychologist had looked at David. A neuropsychologist examined Natalie Keepers and diagnosed her with no less than 7 mental disorders, including borderline personality disorder. The article I was reading just called it a disorder similar to schizophrenia.
Yeah, they didn't name it, but I found that interesting.
No. And certainly David's defense attorney attempted to paint Natalie as the primary assailant here and really spent most of David's trial trying to, get across the fact that he felt Natalie was responsible for the whole entire thing, that it was ultimately blows from the shovel that had her palm print on it that had killed Nicole. He cited the fact that there was evidence in her dorm room, not in David's, including that Blue Minions blanket. He cited that history of severe mental illness on her part. He also cited a fascination with knives and even sort of, took the interesting route of saying that someone had once told the police that Natalie Keepers threatened to kill him. We don't know who that someone is. David's attorney really went out of his way to paint it as this was not David Eisenhower's fault. It was Natalie Keepers' fault. She's the one who has the messed up history.
Although, according to the forensics, David is the one who stabbed her 14 times and slit her throat. So it isn't like Natalie Keepers can be blamed directly for the act of homicide. As far as we know, she wasn't even there.
And Natalie, when she did speak at her own trial, said that David was the sociopath in the whole entire thing. She said David was the sociopath and that he regarded her as his little sociopath in training. So now we've got 2 people, with 2 very different versions of the same event. There was nothing good to come out of this trial. After 4 days of testimony in David Eisenhower's trial, he made a pretty startling turnabout and ultimately decided to plead no contest to first-degree murder, abduction, and concealing a body. Now, for any of our listeners who aren't aware of what the no contest plea means, it means that he basically acknowledged there is enough evidence to convict him, but he's not going to admit that he committed a crime. It serves the same effect as a guilty plea, essentially. At that point, he put a stop to the trial for whatever reason and pled no contest. Ultimately was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
Reading from virginialawfirm.net. In Virginia, this is more typically called a no contest plea. It means that you are not admitting guilt, but you are also not disputing the facts of the charge. Therefore, you accept the court's decision, even though you're not admitting guilt. It typically has the same effect as a guilty plea. So he changed his mind midway through the trial.
4 days in.
And it's funny, these observations that were made by his school classmate about the difficulty dealing with unstructured situations. And obviously court is highly structured in one way, but then in terms of where you and your defense attorney are going to go is a whole different matter. And I can imagine this would have been highly stressful for him and his family, but it is kind of a remarkable turnabout.
He did ultimately apologize to Nicole Lovell's family after his sentencing.
Pardon me while I roll my eyes.
Hardcore eye rolling. After David was sentenced and had his day in court, Natalie Keepers eventually had her trial, and that was September 17th of 2018. Her charges were accessory to murder before the fact in the commission of a felony and felony count of concealing a dead body.
I think she deserved all that and more. If anything, this seems a bit dialed down to me.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, like you were saying earlier, she was in it up to her eyeballs. Again, at her trial, like we had already talked about, she had a neuropsychologist who said that she had a number of mental disorders. According to that same psychologist, Natalie Keepers was a person who would be highly, easily influenced and gullible and easily led. What do you think about that?
Experts said she was probably the one that was doing the leading and that she was excited to be involved in something like this. I know that can be hard for those of us that live in the real world to understand and rationalize, but supposedly she was excited about this prospect of the challenge of figuring out how to kill this girl and how to dispose of her body and how to get away with murder. It seems just so disconnected from whatever soul or conscience you would expect there to be in place in most people. Funny, the two shrinks that observed 27 hours of her various interrogations walked away with some pretty disturbing observations about the state of her mental health, although she didn't use any kind of plea in terms of diminished mental capacity or insanity or anything like that.
Which I thought was very interesting. I mean, you would think that would certainly lead straight into diminished capacity or not guilty by reason of insanity. But no, apparently that was not something that her team was willing to take. She did state in an interview with police, "I thought he was joking. I didn't think David would actually kill her." And again, I can't put a whole lot of stock in that.
No.
Not after you've been to Walmart and picked up a shovel and cleaning supplies. I can't put any stock in that.
Nor can I. I'm not buying any of this.
There were messages, again, between the two of them, one of which was David saying, "Hey, if nobody finds the body for a week, we're good," to which she flippantly replied, "Yep, yep." She also told him, "Hey, it's been a long day, get a good night's sleep." I cannot reconcile those flip sort of messages with someone who
Yeah, long drive, nearly 100 miles to the road where your grandmother's house is located to drop off the body of our victim. And then, of course, they had to drive all over the place, including into West Virginia and various stops along the way to discard at least some of the evidence in this case.
I don't know which of the two of them I dislike more, but
I feel the same way. It's a close contest. They're both just completely reprehensible people.
She also apologized to Nicole Lovell's family. Her apology was, "I wish I could have stopped him. I never intended for this to happen." And again, I think we're both over here rolling our eyes.
The evidence is completely to the contrary, including all of the digital evidence.
I don't buy that for a minute.
You can bury both of them with their own word.
Natalie was ultimately found guilty of being an accessory before the fact to first-degree murder. She had previously pled guilty to helping conceal Nicole Lovell's body, so she had a 5-year sentence for that. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 40 years in prison with a 10-year probation sentence after her release and a no-contact order with Nicole Lovell's family.
It's kind of shocking that it would be necessary for the court to tack on that no contact order. Given the amount of zero judgment these people have shown so far, I guess it's probably a good reminder that, oh, by the way, don't contact the loved ones of the 13-year-old girl you brutally murdered several decades ago.
Natalie Keepers is currently appealing her sentence. Bill, do you want to get into that a little bit?
Well, I mean, legally she has that right. Good luck with that, I would say.
Yeah. And David Eisenhower has not tried to appeal at this point, it should be noted.
Well, let me add something there. Can you appeal a no contest plea from criminallaw.com? The criminal appeal process, if you do not go to trial, but entered a plea, of guilty or no contest, also called nolo contendere, our friends who are lawyers love the Latin, you cannot appeal the judgment against you. In this situation, you must make a motion to withdraw your no contest plea.
Okay.
You can then go through a different process to withdraw a plea than you would to file an appeal. It does not appear that Eisenhower has changed his mind in any way and has tried to withdraw this no contest plea. So he's currently serving his sentence. In the meantime, then, his partner in crime is currently appealing, which, as I said, is her legal right.
Nothing good has come out of this case. You know, you have a beautiful 13-year-old who unfortunately trusted the wrong people, ended up in a place where no one should end up, murdered by someone that she thought she could trust. Now we have a family who is ripped apart and two young people who they sounded very, very promising and now have squandered their lives because they simply didn't stop and take a minute and go, maybe this isn't the best use of my time. Such a sad, sad case for everyone involved.
Yeah, tragedy all the way around. And we've seen clips of her parents speaking in interviews and at press conferences, and it's just incredibly difficult to watch. These people have been completely torn apart. Her mother in particular, Nicole's mother, I mean, she has difficulty just getting through it. There's one press conference we were watching where she just breaks down and walks off the stage.
She's shaking like a leaf.
She's surrounded by law enforcement people who are there to offer their insight, and each one of them will be speaking in turn. As if you've watched the news, you see those kind of press conferences. She was going to speak about their daughter, and she can't even get through it. I get emotional just talking about it. It's just incredibly difficult, this kind of senseless murder and its aftermath. It's probably worth, again, returning to this topic of anonymous social media apps like Kik. And we're not just picking on Kik, the KIK app. For all of us, Kristin's a teacher, I'm a parent. All of us need to be aware of the fact that the young people in our lives are using these apps in ways that, can be a wonderful way to make friends, but you actually don't know who's at the other end of your phone or your computer screen.
As a teacher, and at the risk of sounding like a "you kids get off my lawn,"
I thought that was my job.
Smartphones have become such an hugely addictive part of all of our lives. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of that. Bill and I both have our phones out right here in front of us. It is just something that our society is really going to have to learn how to deal with in a more healthy, in a safer fashion. Smartphones they're a way of life. I see kids who I think are way, way, way too young to have a smartphone who can confidently operate iPads, Samsung Galaxies, just about everything. And it makes me very concerned and very upset to know how much is out there that can cause harm and, fortunately, in Nicole's case, even death when it's in the wrong hands, when it's in the hands of the wrong person.
When I was a kid, which admittedly was 1,000 years ago, the fear was that a strange man would come along in a car and talk to you about a lost puppy or ask for directions or start off with some sort of innocent exchange, and then he would grab you up and take you away. And so little boys and girls had to be afraid of a stranger in a car. Admittedly, that has happened and will happen again. The stranger isn't in a car these days. He's on the internet, and he is presenting himself to your preteen boy or girl as their peer, gaining their trust. It might be someone like Nicole Lovell who's interested in a romantic relationship with an older boy, not realizing that this young man may be 18, but he's a sexual predator without question. It can be the case in Spokane, Washington that we spoke about on the 48 Hours episode, where this 15-year-old girl is engaging in inappropriate contact with a 30-year-old man who drives down from Seattle, meets with her, has sex with her, and then manages to convince her that they should run away together. It's very, very frightening what's going on. All of us need to have a better handle on what's going on with our kids' private lives, particularly in this digital realm.
We really can't encourage you all enough to watch that 48 Hours episode, Killer App. It is very, very well done. It really does drive home for you the dangers of who might be lurking on the other end of a smartphone. And for very impressionable, lonely teenagers who feel that they need some sort of connection that they can't otherwise get in the real world, this seems like the best and most easy and approachable way to have a relationship. Predators don't stop with just one person. In fact, I think probably one of the most interesting moments of that episode was when they showed that 15-year-old girl, who's now 18. It had been several years since her attempted abduction. They showed her all of the pictures of the various other young men and young women. They showed all of those pictures on the phone to the woman that he was going to come abduct, and she couldn't believe it. She said, "I thought it was just me."
Guy was collecting nude and semi-nude photographs of dozens of other young girls and boys, for that matter. That seemed to be the thing that kind of broke her down.
Yeah.
Not, it would appear, the fact that this 30-year-old had attempted to convince her, who was fully aware of the fact, by the way, that she was 15.
Oh, yeah, she had told him.
This predator who had convinced her to run away with him. I understand that teenagers get romantic notions in their heads about, I'm unhappy, my parents don't understand me. I mean, we've all been there. It's that vulnerability that we all have, especially as young people, can be preyed upon. And these creeps are just coming out of the woodwork. I have to put some of this on the technology companies. They're setting up these apps and then claiming that, oh, it's a great way to meet people. Well, that may be true, but there has to be a way to set some parameters so that sexual predators can't use these devices as a way of entering your 13-year-old girl's bedroom.
I mean, we are still trying to figure out ways to navigate the digital landscape, that we have created with the advent of the smartphone. And we don't have answers. We're not claiming to know anything about how to solve this, but gosh, there is any cautionary tale, to be had. It is certainly this truly tragic murder case of Nicole Lovell and every other case of every other young woman or man who has been abducted or raped or murdered by anyone that they, met online and was lured into a relationship with. It's tragic and terrible and terrifying.
On that note, I think we're going to wrap this episode of Mind Over Murder. Any last thoughts?
I think we've pretty much covered it. It's such a sad and upsetting case, but we do hope that being able to give you this information will prompt you to learn a little bit more, especially those of you that are in the teaching profession or who have kids. Think a little bit more about what it is that all of the young people around you are accessing with their smartphones, and maybe take a couple of extra minutes and you can do a little bit of research. Hopefully stop another tragedy.
Sources used for this week's episode include
reporting from CBS News, the Collegiate Times, Inside Edition, the Mercury News, the Radford News Journal, the Roanoke Times, and the Washington Post.
Finally, we strongly recommend an episode which is very helpful to us in putting together this podcast, CBS News Special 48 Hours Killer App. It covers both the Nicole Madison Lovell case as well as a very interesting case that took place in Spokane, Washington, involving the attempted abduction of a 15-year-old girl by a 30-year-old man she had also met on the Kick app, and we strongly recommend it.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.